global economy. LBC's political editor Natasha Clark has been telling Iain Dale Labour is giving the Prime Minister cautious backing.
Even Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, was on board with this idea that Parliament be spoken to at a later date. But today in the House of Commons, he did say, well, how far does our support go?
Rishi Sunak says he's talking to Tory MPs as he faces growing pressure from right-wingers to toughen up the Rwanda bill. Earlier, the Conservatives' Deputy Chairman, Lee Anderson, confirmed he will join a possible rebellion. A man's appeared in court charged with conspiracy to cause public nuisance over an alleged plot to disrupt the London Stock Exchange. Sean Middleborough from Liverpool has been remanded in custody until next month. 4 other people have been bailed pending further inquiries. And train drivers belonging to ASLEF have announced a new series of rail strikes for the end of the month. The government says it's already made a fair and reasonable pay offer. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 30 points at 75.94. The pound will buy $1.27 and €1.16. LBC weather, showers continuing in the north and along western coast tonight, with sleet and snow arriving in western areas later on. An overnight low of -6 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. On the panel with me, Sam Lister is to my immediate right, political editor of the Daily Express. Next to her, it's Paul Nowak, General Secretary of the TUC. To my left, Seema Malhotra, Labour's Shadow Skills Minister and MP for Feltham and Heston. And next to her is Craig Tracey, Conservative Party Deputy Chairman and MP for North Warwickshire. Now, you probably thought Lee Anderson was the Deputy Chairman. Well, he is, but there's apparently a whole raft of them now. Who knew? We have lots of questions coming in. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973, text 84850, or say Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and do watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Nick in Lewis in Sussex. Hello, Nick.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. Good evening, panel. My question is quite simple. Is there any difference in the foreign policy of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, particularly with reference to the ongoing events in the Middle East?
Do you think there should be?
Do I think there should be?
Yeah.
I would like to see some clear water between the two of them, yes.
OK. Seema Malhotra, let's come to you first.
I think there's a very important reflection on where we are, which is that both the government and the opposition are needing, I think, to put a foot forward for Britain's role in the world. And it's a hugely complex situation. I think that's the reason why you've seen us be saying very similar things. But there's no doubt that there are areas where we do have some disagreement, and where we are looking to, I think, have a stronger way in which we're moving forward. I think first I would say on at the moment is pushing further on a sustainable ceasefire. Of course, there's the use of the sustainable ceasefire because it's fundamental.
That's
that
the phrase that David Cameron's used.
It's fundamental that we get peace. I think the issue is the importance of having a political solution and having more emphasis put on that. And in a sense, Parliament hasn't been doing enough, anywhere near enough, in Parliament as well as on the UK on the international stage to secure a political solution. We have also said, and Lisa Nandy,
just on that,
if I can just finish this point,
no, but on exactly what you just said there.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer, if anything, has been more hardline on Israel than the government has.
If you look at what we have been saying, and I think this is extremely important because I, as someone who also went out to the Middle East in June, and I went out with Kabu. The emphasis
with
that
what?
we have, the Centre for Arab and British Understanding, and this is cross-party. The important thing is that we haven't had any emphasis on a political solution to tackle some of the issues that have not been resolved, and to make sure that we've got a two-state solution that is a viable and secure Palestine alongside secure Israel. And the backdrop to the conflict that we've got now is that there hasn't been a political solution. We have raised a lot in Parliament about the importance of abiding by international law and the need for humanitarian aid. I think this is where there is the need to work across government, across Parliament on this. I've raised directly with ministers as well cases from my constituency, families of who are in Gaza of my constituents who have. One example, the brother of my constituent who went back home thinking it was safe. A missile hit his home. He was killed. His son was killed. His wife has lost a limb. 2 other children were in intensive care. Another brother living in a house with 80 people who had left their own homes. They were under siege by the IDF. Food and water was withheld. Men and women were separated.
We're going slightly off the subject.
If I can just make this point. This is the reason why, as parliamentarians and as the Labour Party as well, it's really important that we look to how we're moving forward, how we're looking at international law being upheld, minimisation of civilian fatalities. We cannot have a situation where we've got over 23,000 deaths in Gaza and over 50,000 who are injured, and a decimation of the health system.
You've talked for quite a long time, but haven't given a single example of a difference between Conservative foreign policy and Labour foreign policy.
If you look at the motion, though, that we voted on, which the Tories voted against, they voted against the move to political solution that we had in our motion. They voted against making sure that there was upholding of international law for what was going on both within Israel by Hamas as well as by Israel in Gaza.
Ignore Israel. Is there any other part of foreign policy where you can see a major difference between the two main parties?
I think in terms of foreign policy, more recent foreign policy, I think you're right in this respect, that on Ukraine we have been united. On largely, though I think there are the differences that I've talked about on Israel and Palestine in the recent conflict, that's been the case. I think on other areas as well, if you look at what David Lammy is saying, the fact that we have to be much more of a global Britain, looking outwards rather than inwards, and really focusing on being internationalist again as a party, I think that is extremely different from where the Tories have left us. And I think it's right to say that we have been much more inward focused, particularly since Brexit, and that is not about being a global force for good in the world. That is about being insular and internally focused. And I think that is problematic, because if you see what's happened with the Tories now and the infighting, it's also been about breaking down so much of where Britain has been influential in the world and a force for good.
Craig Tracey.
From my perspective, I think, when you've got a governing party, then you would like to think that on the issues that we're talking about, in particular here, so like with Israel, with Ukraine, with the Red Sea attacks, things like that, when that policy is put forward, it's done in the national interest, so that the other parties generally would find it difficult not to fall in line behind it. I'm sure, on sort of broader foreign policy, there are some differences there, and I think as we get into election campaigns and manifestos, those will start to tease out.
Isn't this a problem, though, for both parties, where under Jeremy Corbyn there were clear foreign policy differences between the two parties? That they are less so now. Now, in some ways, you could argue that's a good thing, because I think Labour's support for the government on Ukraine it's the right thing to do, just as I think it is here. But from a voter's point of view, there's less of an incentive to vote. If you think that the parties are too similar, not just on foreign policy but other things too, there's a great incentive just to stay at home.
So, I think like I say, as you come out, as we get near, people's focus will move away just from the narrow things that we're talking about at the moment, like I say, particularly in the Middle East. But it's not a crime in politics that if you agree with somebody that you can back them on it. And like I say, on issues of national national security, national policy, then I think it's right, unless there are very strong differences, that they do come in and support us, and we do show a united front to the rest of the world on these things.
Sam Lister.
I think that's a good point. I think actually on international matters, then it's not unusual to find the two main parties in broad agreement. But I think what Jeremy Corbyn still haunts the Labour Party, and obviously foreign policy was very much what defined him. And I think what Keir Starmer's trying to do is obviously move away from that legacy. And so when it comes to Russia-Ukraine, obviously Jeremy Corbyn found it very difficult to ever condemn Russia for the Salisbury terror attack on British soil. So Keir Starmer wants to be very clear where he is on that. When it comes to Israel-Palestine, we know where Jeremy Corbyn very clearly was on that. And so Keir Starmer, again, is defining himself against his predecessor's legacy. And that is to portray the Labour Party as a sensible, centrist party that voters can trust. And so I think there is
though, when he serves in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet.
Well, I mean, that is certainly something he will be asked about repeatedly, I'm sure, during the election campaign. But I think that is part of the motivation. I don't want to kind of impugn Keir Starmer's motivations on this. I'm sure he's taking decisions in the national interest. But I think that is always at the background of all this, is Jeremy Corbyn and his foreign policy.
Paul.
Well, I don't think that Nick or anybody else, the British public, would want to see politicians using what's happening in the Red Sea or Gaza to score political points.
We had a caller just before this programme started who was basically saying Biden and Sunak are doing this because they've got elections this year. And people are cynical about that sort of thing.
And I think that cynicism is out there amongst the public. And I think it was right that, for example, Keir today talked about the need for any action to secure broad international support, talked about the need for adequate scrutiny in Parliament. Yes, the Prime Minister does need to be held to account on these issues. And I think there are differences clearly between the political parties on foreign policy as well as domestic policy. Domestic policy, the differences are a chasm on things like the world of work, public services. But even on foreign policy, I've had those discussions with David Lammy about things like trade policy. We've had a trade policy in this country which is pile them high, sell them cheap. Get as many trade deals as possible to prove that we're outward-facing global Britain, with not a reference to things like labour standards, trade union rights, environmental standards. I think David Lammy and Labour will take a very different approach. So I think there are differences. What you don't want to do is force differences on important issues where, lives and livelihoods are at stake, not just those in the Royal Navy. Our unions are representing seafarers who are going through the Red Sea each and every single day. Their unions, their international union, very concerned about keeping those workers safe and making sure that they can go home to their families at the end of the day as well.
So we can talk a little bit more about the military strikes in a minute, but trade unionists who work on merchant ships, are they in favour of Britain and America's actions in trying to keep these sea lanes open?
I don't think you're going to find one homogenous sort of view, Ian, but I think those workers, like any other workers, will want to be able to go about their day-to-day work and feel safe and secure. That doesn't mean they're going to agree with the UK government on every aspect of foreign policy, but our unions will be working closely, certainly through the International Federation, to do what we can to make sure that, for example, their representatives are talking to the shipping companies about, do we reroute, for example, for a period of time. Obviously, there are a set of other issues at play in the Middle East, but I'm concerned about those seafarers who go to work day in, day out, who are keeping us supplied.
Let's have a follow-up text question, which is sort of vaguely allied to this. Gareth in Cheshire says, given the evident amount of criticism about Middle East policy, why are there so many people ideologically opposed to the West living in the West? Craig?
It's a good question. It's one of those things that we get through our mailbox a lot. I think this is why we, as a country, we are still an attractive prospect to so many people. Long may that continue. But I think in terms of these types of conflict and things like that, it does then show a bit of divide out in the streets. We've seen protests, things like that happening, that is not a good look for the country. So I think I still think we are a great country to be in, to live in, despite when people seem to knock it. But that we are a draw.
Seema?
I don't see it as so many people in the sense of like a majority. Or I think there's certainly people who may disagree with maybe perspectives taken in Britain. I think one example is Windrush and Black Lives Matter. I think there are sometimes differences, but I think we have to be quite careful about some of this debate, because I think what we want to be able to have is good dialogue, good democratic dialogue, a strong parliament, a strong democracy, and I think
we want all of those things, but
we do.
Gareth's point is that there are many people who come here who don't seem to want those things.
Well, I think what we have in Britain is a way in which we also see the importance of the upholding of British values, of democracy, of dialogue, of respect, of inclusion, and those values matter very much. I think that's what we do see in how we how we run our communities and how we run our country.
Paul.
Yeah, I don't like this sort of stark division between those who support the West ideologically and those who don't. I don't think it's a black and white issue. I think it's entirely right and fair to say you're absolutely appalled by Hamas's attacks on October the 7th, and also be appalled at the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Gaza, and wanting the UK government and the US government to do more to put pressure on Israel to bring those.
Palestine march on Saturday chanting Yemen, Yemen, do us proud, turn another ship around. Well, I mean, what are these people's motives?
Well, I can't speak for the motives of someone who shouts those slogans, and I don't think those slogans reflect the vast majority of people who want to see an end to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, who want to see a ceasefire, who want to see more humanitarian aid, and also want to see the return of the hostages. So, I mean, we can always find an idiot on a march who's going to shout a particular slogan. I don't think that represents the vast majority of people who are concerned about what's happening in Gaza.
Quite a few. Well, just the very thing that would annoy your readers, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, our readers would be very kind of upset to see that behaviour, and I think when it comes to Western values, if you are a woman or a minority when it comes to sexuality, race or faith, I think the West is a much more pleasant place to be.
I think we can all agree on that, can't we?
Can we, though?
Let's move on in just a few moments' time. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
If you've just tuned in and you're wondering who the voices are around the table, they are Paul Nowak from the TUC, Seema Malhotra, Labour MP, and Shadow Skills Minister, Sam Lister, Political Editor of the Daily Express, and Craig Tracey, Conservative Party Deputy Chairman and MP for North Warwickshire. Right, a text question now from Carol, who says, how can Lee Anderson join a backbench Tory rebellion against Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan and continue as a party deputy chairman? Now, just as a bit of background to this and to allow Craig Tracey a few seconds to prepare his answer, Lee Anderson has confirmed he intends to vote for amendments to the PM's Rwanda bill, amendments which are intended to make it much harder to appeal against being deported from the UK than it would be under Sunak's plan. Craig, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lee. Look, I mean, I think with these, on the amendments, so I've spoken to a lot of colleagues about this, and I'm sure people not familiar with Parliament might be interested. Often these amendments are done to probe and to get the government to talk. I know there's been meetings going on over the last few days. I've spoken to a lot of colleagues who've actually signed their amendments but are not going to actually then go on to support it. So we'll see what Lee does in the 24, 48 hours ahead. But obviously, if it's something that he feels strong about, then, if he goes ahead and vote for it, then there will be a conversation at that point, I'm sure, with the party chairman.
But the role of deputy chairman, you're not formally a member of the government, are you? But in a way you are, because you are sort of one of the senior people in the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were voting against a government bill, or voting for an amendment which the government hadn't approved, you would expect to have to resign for that, wouldn't you?
If it's three-line whip vote, then the protocol would be that unless there's extenuating constituency circumstances, so for an example like me has been HS2, which was a big issue for the area, so you can there are times when that can be gone, but normal practice.
But one of the charges against Rishi Sunak from Labour is that he's weak. Well, if Lee does go ahead and do this and is still in his position on Wednesday, that would be evidence that Labour are right.
Well, interestingly, these are roles that are appointed by the party rather than
the Prime Minister
as a government. But it's actually a party employed role.
Yeah, but the Prime Minister appointed you, didn't he?
Well, it was actually the chairman appointed me. I didn't have a conversation with the Prime Minister on it, but it was done through the chairman's office, and the contract is with the party. So whether that creates a difference or not, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it's arisen in recent history.
Sam.
I mean, this is a real mess. The rebels, three of the rebel groups met tonight to discuss all this, and Lee made his announcement after those talks. I was told there was a lot of anger within the group about this whole bill. But you have to remember, actually, both sides of the Conservative Party, who are currently taking 7 bells out of each other, actually agree on this bill. It's a very kind of technical thing that they're going to war over. But I think Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith, another deputy chairman, who has also said he will vote for the amendments. They've put the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip in a really difficult position. Now, as I understand it, they actually do intend to fall in line when it comes to third reading, which, as we know, is the crucial vote, which will pass it through to the House of Lords. But whether you can get to that stage, having voted for these rebel amendments in the positions they are, now that is very, very tricky, because you do look like you've lost that party discipline. And not everybody on the right of the party is very in the same place on this. A lot of people who, fear that this is looking so bad to voters want the party to unite, and they feel that people like Lee Anderson and Brendan Clark-Smith are being very self-indulgent. That there is a lot of upset about this, and I think although I think actually most rebels plan to fall into line on Wednesday, not all do, but most of them do. Number 10 is not confident of the numbers, and now the third reading vote on Wednesday is in doubt. They are considering pulling that vote if they can't be sure they've got the numbers to get this through.
Paul?
I mean, you'd laugh if it wasn't so serious, because you think about the big issues that face this country, whether it's the state of the NHS, an economy that's in the doldrums, people facing spiralling household debt, the list goes on and on and on. And yet again, we are absorbed with the psychodrama inside the Conservative Party over a policy which I suspect many people find not only repugnant, is completely unworkable. No one really thinks this legislation is going to pass and that a single person is going to go to Rwanda as a result of it, despite £400 million worth of taxpayers' money being spent on it. And, the 5 families of the Conservative Party, it's like a pound shop Sopranos that we're all being forced to watch. At the same time, the country's got really big issues in front of it. And frankly, I think voters will cast their vote, will cast their verdict on the government and their obsession with their internal party management rather than the big issues that face the British public at the election.
And Craig, you could be last deputy standing by Wednesday.
I'll keep me busy in the run-up to the election. But no, I mean, look, I think on this, to me, this particular bill is, in its current form, is the only game in town at the moment. There's, I think...
What an endorsement.
Well, I think the problem is that we've got that if we push any further, then the Rwandan government will pull out of the agreement. So we've taken it as far as we can. So I think there's limited room for manoeuvre with the amendments, is the honest...
Seema?
I think people are watching this and just seeing that this is a Tory civil war that is continuing, and it's utter chaos. This is the third bill that is being brought forward to try and deal with the very, very serious issue of boats and those who are coming into the UK. And you've got this at a time when we know that the asylum system has completely broken. This looks like yet another gimmick, an extremely expensive one with a cost of £400 million. And you've got the crazy situation of the deputy chairman actually signing the amendments of the rebels. Now, people want a serious answer from a serious government to the challenge we're facing. That's why when Yvette Cooper's been laying out what Labour would do, it's been really serious about having more better relationships with our European partners, with Europol's cracking and tackling the smugglers, the people smugglers, and making sure that we clear the asylum backlog in the UK. I mean, how can you have a situation where you've got 150,000 in the backlog and then you've got a solution that is going to be taking less than 1% to Rwanda? 100 people is what the Court of Appeal said may be going to Rwanda under this. I think people are looking incredulously at the government and at Rishi Sunak. It just seems to be more and more gimmicks, and I think even more so than the chaos of the Tory party, you're looking at a government in disarray, focused in on itself and not the country. When you've got an NHS in crisis, you've got policing in crisis, and people are wanting solutions to services that are broken, utterly broken.
But do you feel that they're getting those solutions from you? I mean, you broadly.
I think we have got a lot to offer, and I think people know that. I mean,
There's not much detail that you give,
the thing
is
is that
there?
people say there's not a lot of detail, but actually there's a hell of a lot of detail, and more so than you would have from an opposition before now. So whether it is how we would invest in safer streets and making sure that we've got 13,000 new police officers, recognising that we've lost 2,000 GPs under the Tories, recognising that homelessness was up 14%.
Yeah, let me give you an example where I think people are a bit...
and they have been outlined.
And we're going slightly off the subject again, but just before we go to the news, Keir Starmer today committed £500 million to an initiative so there's a mental health professional in every school. I think everybody think that's a good idea. Asked how he's going to pay for it, he said, well, it'll be the VAT that we put on private school fees. This is the seventh thing that he said is going to pay for by using that money, which they estimate to be 1.5 billion. There are a lot of experts think it'll be a lot less than that. So, I mean, that's where people are sort of slightly doubtful as to whether the detail is there.
I think it is clear about how we're paying for things. I think the difference is where we have made announcements that the Tories have then taken and absorbed and are paying for. In a sense, it still leaves on the table the extra that will come from the measures that we are proposing. So there is, in that sense, the reason why we're very clear that we would be sticking to our fiscal rules, that we will only be able to afford what we can only invest what we can afford. That's all extremely clear, and where the Tories take our ideas, then it does leave that on the table for the future.
Right, lots more questions to come. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Tim Daly.
Rishi Sunak says last week's strikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen were intended as a single limited action. He's been updating MPs in the Commons for the first time since the joint UK-US operation. The Prime Minister also says he's talking to Tory MPs as he faces growing pressure from right-wingers to toughen up the Rwanda bill. Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, says he will join a possible rebellion. And the Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir is expected to be declared a terrorist organisation after a vote in Parliament later on this week. The group is claiming the government is trying to censor debate. LBC weather, showers continuing in the north and along western coasts overnight. Sleet and snow will arrive in western areas later on as well, and we'll see an overnight low of -6 degrees.
This is LBC.
Let me tell you who's on our panel. Paul Nowak, who is General Secretary of the TUC, Seema Malhotra, Labour Shadow Skills Minister, Sam Lister, Political Editor at the Daily Express, and Craig Tracey, Conservative Party Deputy Chairman and MP for North West Warwickshire. Now, this is an interesting one. John is in Sandbach. Hello, John.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
When I watch the Labour MPs being interviewed on television, I would say they're on a panel with the Tory MPs and everybody else. I get the impression that they're easily bullied. I mean, you'll get a Tory MP, you'll ask him a question, and he'll go on and on and on, and he won't stop talking.
No offence, Craig.
And then when the Labour MP starts to speak, he'll butt in. And the chairman of whoever's doing it, and doing the show and all that, just sits there. while the Labour MP's being interrupted all the time by the Conservative MP, and he just sit there and and you don't say, look, mate,
Go on, name names there, because I'm thinking of all the people that... I mean, Wes Streeting doesn't sit there and take it. David Lammy doesn't sit there and take it. Rachel Reeves doesn't... Who are you talking about? I doubt whether Seema does either.
I won't certainly sit there and take it.
Who are you talking about, John?
To me, they do. I mean, it's not every MP, but there's lots who I just watch and think, don't let them keep talking. You stand up for your corner and put your point across, and they don't seem to.
It's a slightly unfortunate day you're raising this question, given that there's a poll out today that shows that Labour would get 120-seat majority. So whatever approach they're adopting seems to be working. That Seema, I've known you for some time. I can't imagine you being bullied on any panel.
Well, look, I think this is really important, and I think sometimes there is the sort of interruptions that do happen, and sometimes the panels are, better chaired than other times. I think we're looking at an exemplar here, Iain. But I think the point is this: I was doing a TV show fairly recently, and viewers did say, and it was on Twitter, that they felt that when I spoke, I was interrupted a lot, and I kept pushing back. But it is important that we have fair conversation, fair dialogue, and that it isn't the case that one side is able to talk more than another. There is also going to be a push to really challenge the Labour Party, because I think time and time again we're seeing that the Conservatives are in chaos, and one way of the best form of defence is sometimes attack, and I think people are fed up, and the Tories don't like to hear what their record is. They don't like to hear that they're being criticised. I think they don't like to hear that the country wants a change, and the country does want a change. I think it's probably time for a general election. I think all of this is saying, let's have a general election,
we're going to get one before
and
the end
let's
of the
have
year.
the people have their say.
One thing, John, I would say is that, fair enough, have a go at whoever's chairing a panel. But sometimes you do get somebody on a panel who is so dominant, whether it's Labour or Conservative or whoever, and it's very difficult to shut them up without being gratuitously... I mean, let me give you an example. I was on Question Time about 2 years ago, and Emily Thornberry was on the panel, and Emily and I get on really well, very friendly with each other, always have done. She got 13 minutes out of the 60 minutes. I got 3. I can't remember who the Tory was on the panel, but... Emily is a dominant personality, and I don't say that as a criticism at all. And there are some politicians, some pundits as well, who are more shrinking violets than others. And if I go, I think I know the programme that you're talking about. If I go on that programme, it's generally where there are 3 female panellists, and I just sit there as the voice of sweet reason, because I know that if I interrupt too much, I just get accused of being a misogynist bully. So I just sit there and say very little.
Well, this was 3 female panellists.
Very quickly, Sam.
Well, I think, actually Labour women are pretty good at handling themselves.
Don't say feisty, I get into trouble.
I would not say feisty, but I would say, if you think the first people I thought of when this question cropped up were Angela Rayner and Jess Phillips, and I mean, to be fair, they don't let anybody get a word in edgeways, so I don't think there's a problem there. I think it just is down to the individual, isn't it? Some people particularly have a punchy style, some prefer a more laid-back style. That's just people, and I don't feel there's any particular party politics in that. I think chairing can really vary, and I think that can be a problem. But I think there's always a tension between the chair trying to keep a grip on things and politicians just rambling on and getting dominating, just getting all. You've got there is a tension between keeping them on track and letting people waffle on, isn't there? Same.
Trade unionists are notoriously reticent and shy to come forward, so I always try and moderate whatever I say. But I do think quite often sometimes those politicians that have, the more bluff and more bluster, the more they're trying to avoid the issues and trying to avoid being held to account on their record. And I want every Labour MP to be on the front foot, because I think the record of this government is appalling and need to be called out.
Craig Tracey.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of it is that it's generally balanced. I think you could probably argue from all parties that they don't get enough airtime or that they're interrupted. I think, in my local area, so I'm in the Midlands, and I've come up against Jess Phillips on numerous occasions, and certainly it's always an interesting challenge. So I don't really see that side of things, to be perfectly honest, and I'll try and keep my answer short. So.
Excellent, because that means we can get another one in before a break. Jack in Essex has sent in a text question. When voting in the general election, should I be looking at my constituency or the government? I only ask as with the general election coming up, I want to vote for the MP who currently holds the seat in my constituency, as I believe they are the best suited candidate locally. However, I don't agree with their party's policies or believe they should be in power. Unfortunately, Jack doesn't tell us where in Essex he lives, because then we could work. I think I've got an idea of which constituency Jack is in, but I'll probably get it wrong. Jack, text in again, and I won't read it out if you don't want me to, but I'd love to know where you are. This is a classic dilemma, isn't it? And I think a lot of people are going to go through this, where they quite like their own MP. I always remember Andrew Mitchell, when he was the MP for Gedling in the 1997 election, and he'd been there, I think, for 10 years. And I think he got a good reputation as a constituency MP. And during the election campaign, he encountered a lady that he'd done a lot of work for on a constituency case. And he just said to her, sort of, as you would, hope I can count on your support on polling day. Well, no, Mr. Mitchell, we really like you, but it's time for a change. And I wonder how many Conservative MPs are hearing that. Are you hearing that at all, Craig?
I must admit, I'm not on the doorstep. I think, from my perspective, I would always say to vote for your local representation, because there they are, the ones who go into Parliament, who are going to vote on your behalf, who are going to raise the issues on your behalf. And I think actually one of the real bits of unseen work that we do as MPs is the casework side, that everybody thinks, we go into Parliament and shout at each other because they watch PMQs. But actually, we were just looking back the other day, and I think we've sort of successfully completed about 25,000 pieces of casework since 2015. That's working with people who are probably, may not vote for me, I don't know, because we never ask, but also people who don't vote, really vulnerable people as well. So I think that's the unseen side of the thing. So to me, it's about that local representation rather than necessarily who is going to form the government. But I would say that as a local MP.
You would. Paul?
I mean, at this general election, people are going to have a choice. Do you want another 5 years of this government, or do you want to vote for change? And I don't care how nice your MP is. I think people have to ask themselves the question, do I feel better off than I was 14 years ago? Are our public services in a better state than they were 14 years ago? Am I more hopeful about the future of this country than I was 14 years ago? And I think if people ask themselves those questions, they're not going to vote for this government regardless of how great their local MP is, because obviously lots of MPs across the political spectrum do lots of good local work, and I wouldn't take anything away from that, but I don't think this country can afford another 5 years of this government.
Seema?
I think that's absolutely right. People are going to really look at the next election through the national lens, because it is time for a change.
Well, Jack doesn't know whether he should.
I'll come on. I'll just make a point about that in a minute. People are going to primarily do that, and look, I saw that a little bit in the last election, where some people did say to me, you've done a lot of work for us, and we do see that, but the Get Brexit Done message got through, and it did affect a section of my vote. I think people are now looking, however, to the country as a whole. They see a Britain that is worse in so many ways than it was 10 or now 14 years ago. They see an NHS in crisis. They see their streets less safe. They see their education, that their children are getting worse than it was before. They see teachers under stress. They see children waiting a year for mental health support. I mean, everywhere you look, things are worse than they were. There is nothing in Britain that works better than it did when the Tories came to power. And people are really worried about the future for their families. They know they're worse off. I think what is important is that we are really focused on what we need for the future, and what we've laid out in terms of how we need to invest in our energy supply, energy system. So we've got green energy, that it's sustainable. We don't see the energy crisis that we've seen in the last few years. We don't see the supply chain crisis because we have a stronger economy. So many aspects of what people have been through has just made people feel utterly exhausted. And that's why people now want a change.
Please note I didn't interrupt at all during that answer. Craig, can you name me one thing that works better now than it did 14 years ago in this country?
Well, I think we need to remember the backdrop of where we
understand
are.
that.
But I think
simple question.
Well, I think these. There's been an awful lot of challenges, and I think we're pushing, we're working extremely hard to try and get off the backdrop of what was a 1 in 100 year event. We've recruited 20,000 more police officers.
You cut
so we've got the police, but we've got more people on the streets,
didn't you?
And also, but we're bringing them in, and we're better resourcing them now than ever. If I look at my local area, we're seeing real big reductions in crime. So looking on a local basis, but it has been a challenging few years with COVID and with the with.
So basically, you can't
Ukraine.
answer the question.
Well, it's as I say, it's off a very difficult backdrop that we have been through. We have to accept that there's been an awful lot of things for us to deal with.
I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I would say actually a really good constituency MP is an incredibly valuable thing. That person who can campaign, bring a new school to your town, who cares about that community centre, who will listen to their constituents and reflect that back into Westminster. That is a really valuable thing. And I would just point out that actually, we've all been very consumed by the ITV drama, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. Who was it who pushed that all the way through? That was a constituency MP, James Arbuthnot, who was there by his constituent side from day one right to the very end. And that is a really incredibly powerful thing.
In truth, it's a combination of both when it comes to decision you make at the ballot box. But I think there is an overriding mood now. There is an overriding mood, and that's particularly with people who maybe have been undecided before or who haven't voted before, that they now feel this election coming up is really, really important and that the country needs a change. I think that's where I feel there's a really different mood.
OK, right. We don't forget we have our fun question at the end, which the panellists always love. Sometimes they even give some quite funny answers. Not every time, though, it has to be said. It's 8:47.
LBC
Paul Nowak, Seema Malhotra, Sam Lister and Craig Tracey with me. Text question from Peter in Oxford. Given that the train drivers can just keep striking whenever they like, is there any way of stopping them without just giving them what they want? Paul Nowak.
Sit down and negotiate a fair settlement. Simple as that, Ian. And ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, has done that precisely with 14 train operating companies. The one thing they've all got in common is that they haven't had their negotiate mandate set by the Department for Transport. So just give you a very quick practical example. I was on 3 trains today. I came in on Merseyrail to Liverpool Lime Street, run by the local transport authority. No strikes there because the local Merseyrail have reached agreement with their drivers. I got on Avanti West Coast. There will be strikes there. Avanti are directly linked to the Department for Transport. And I got on London Underground. And again, there won't be any strikes on London Underground because the difference is this government has spent a year stonewalling negotiations. So the best way to avoid any dispute is to get round a table and reach an agreement. And that's what I'd urge the train operating companies and the Department for Transport to do.
See, I'd have thought you'd have had a chauffeur-driven car.
Those days are long gone. I don't even get a bus pass, never mind a chauffeur-driven
I remember
car.
in the late 1980s when there was a national dock strike and I was working for the port employers doing their media, and I lived in Walthamstow, and Ron Todd from the Transport General Workers Union lived in Walthamstow as well. And I remember walking to this tube station at 6 o'clock in the morning and being passed in the street by Ron Todd in his chauffeur-driven limousine.
Well, Ron was a great fella, but unfortunately there is no chauffeur-driven limousine for me. It's definitely Merseyrail all the way.
But you understand the growing frustration.
Absolutely. I absolutely do understand the frustration. And I tell you, the frustration is there amongst the drivers themselves. I mean, this has been over a year now. They haven't had a pay rise. ASLEF actually have made the point they haven't had a real terms pay rise for 5 years now for their members. But the way to resolve any dispute, and I've been a trade unionist for over 30 years, is to negotiate in good faith. And that's precisely what the government is not allowing the train operating companies to do. So if you can reach agreements in 14 other companies, you can resolve these disputes, and I think it's in the interest of our economy, the travelling public, to get these disputes resolved, but the ball is in the government's court.
Sam?
I think part of the issue now is that actually commuters, and I am somebody who uses the East Coast Main Line twice a week, every week, have just adapted to these strikes now, and which kind of hits at the power of the unions a little bit. So the strikes were announced today. It's on a day that I'm travelling. I get to my ticket and I think, right, well, I'll go for the non-unionised train operator that also operates on that line, and people just do that. And then you get to the point where actually fewer and fewer people are using the trains because they're less and less reliable, and that harms the.
But that's all very well for the likes of you and me who can adapt. I mean, I've got on the 30th, well, there's going to be a strike on South Eastern. I've got an eye clinic appointment that morning at 10 o'clock. Well, I'm not going to be able to get there unless I pay for a hotel the previous night, which I can do, and I obviously will do. But it's a right faff.
But Ian, it goes back to your question to Craig about does anything in this country work better than it did 14 years ago? I regularly use the London North Western route out of Euston. Those services are delayed, cancelled, 4 carriages instead of 8 on a routine basis, regardless of whether or not there's industrial action. I mean, the service is at breaking point, regardless of any dispute between the unions and the employer. And it's just another example, for our railways, read the NHS, getting a GP's appointments, our schools literally crumbling around our children.
The answer has got to be getting around the table in negotiation. As far as I understand, and this is pretty shocking, Mark Harper, Transport Secretary, has not actually met the Train Drivers Union since Christmas.
Well, he's not the employer, is he?
2022. Politicians have a part to play. This is another example of where the government says it's everybody else but us. Government has a part to play. And if the Secretary of State has not met the Train Drivers Union since Christmas of 2022, it certainly is a government that is not playing its part. And it seems to me it's an utter dereliction of duty. You want to resolve the issues as a government, you need to play a part too.
Well, Mick Whelan, the General Secretary of ASLEF, he says he also hasn't met with the Rail Delivery Group, who are the employers, since last January, which, I mean, I find that Shocking, Craig.
Well, look, I think these are pretty disappointing that the strikes are going to take place. My understanding is that an offer has been put in. It takes salary to nearly 65k for a 4-day week, and that's without any overtime on there. That's well above the national average, and it's well above, the salaries of many of those people whose lives will be disrupted by it.
But that's pitting worker against worker, isn't it?
Well, but I think the thing is, the issue around this is that ASLEF actually haven't put the offer to their members, and they're the only union who are refusing to do that. So what I would say, back to Paul, is that really they need to actually put this offer to their members and see what their members think of the deal before having these strikes.
Okay, Gemma in Manchester says, how should we treat America if Donald Trump wins again? Would they still be a close ally? Paul?
I mean, we have to work with whoever is the president of the United States. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Now, I hope to God it's not Donald Trump, but whoever is in number 10 will have to deal with whoever is in the White House. I mean, we obviously got a very close working relationship with our US counterpart, the AFL-CIO. I think, his last stint as president, I mean, was divisive and disastrous for working people in America, but whoever's in the White House, we've got to deal with them.
But that's not how a lot of working people in America see his presidency. The economy went gangbusters up until COVID. Black employment was at the highest levels ever.
Well, it depends on how you define when gangbusters. I mean, for lots of ordinary working people, there are similar issues in the States that they had in the UK, in that, increases in GDP don't necessarily translate it to increases in people's wages and the money that's in their pockets. And obviously, I mean, there's a whole sort of culture issues at play in the States as well, and will no doubt be union members and working people who will vote for Donald Trump. I don't think that's good for the US. I don't think it's good for the international community, but we've got to deal with whoever is in the White House.
Craig?
Yeah, I think similar view that if you have somebody who's democratically elected, one of our closest allies countries, then we do have to work with them. I think it was disappointing previously when the Speaker didn't invite Donald Trump when he was president into Parliament and actually blocked that, because I think we should be able to make our own mind up on these things, but when they are democratically elected, then we have to.
Even if he withdraws from NATO?
Well, I mean, I think, again, it's one of those conversations that if, you'd like to think as a close ally, we can help to ensure he stays part of that. But if we push away from it, then we're not going to get anywhere.
Seema?
David Lammy spoke about this recently in his interview in the visits that he's doing in the Middle East and more widely. Britain has to work with governments of other countries, and if Donald Trump is elected and he's the president of the United States, then we will have to, as the UK, work with Donald Trump as the president. I think this is this is quite significant from David Lammy in his recent work, because this is about saying we want to be an outward-facing nation again. We want to build the relationships we need to across the world. In a sense, Britain hasn't invested in that, and that's going to be really important in also being influential.
Okay, Sam?
The UK and the US are the closest of allies. The people involved are transitory. That alliance remains and always should. And I think, actually, on the point you make about NATO, if my memory serves me correctly, and a lot has happened since then, there was a lot of tub-thumping last time round from Donald Trump about withdrawing from NATO and everybody else not spending enough, which he did have a point on, to be fair. And it was Theresa May who actually got him to commit publicly to remaining part of NATO. And I think that shows the value of the close relationship between the UK and the US.
Yeah, she did that quite skillfully, didn't she?
Very
She put him on the spot publicly.
Yeah, and it worked. And I've got no doubt that could happen again.
Right, our fun question from Sandra in Huddersfield. With Gladiators, the latest retro TV show, to get a reboot, which one would you like to bring back next? And would you go on it yourself? Sam?
Yeah, easy for me, and actually quite topical. Bullseye. and I'd want to win Bully Special Prize, a speedboat, even though I'm completely landlocked. But, it was a great show, great fun, and, looked like a perhaps come on and be the special
I was
guest
not
star.
expecting that. Paul?
Mine doesn't have to be rebooted. I am a huge fan of Bargain Hunt. It's now on Bargain Hunt. It's now on Series 67.
Oh my God!
The first thing I'm going to do when I finish this TUC General Secretary, me and my wife are going to go on Bargain Hunt. It's a thinly veiled plea to the producers of Bargain Hunt.
But it's like 10, 20 quid they're fighting over.
But it's just the sheer joy of the programme. I mean, I really enjoy it. During lockdown, actually, I had to work from home. That became my sort of regular routine. You know, working all morning, working all day, working all evening. Take an hour out for Bargain Hunt at 12:15 on BBC.
I'd rather watch Loose Women. Seema?
I have to have some sympathy with that because Bargain Hunt, I tell you, the number of hours you could spend watching that show.
No,
it is
not another one.
What
is it about these lefties on the panel?
Well, I used to watch it. My mum used to love it when I was with my mum, because I used to be her carer a few days a week. But it is a fantastic show. But the other show that I would want to see come back, and this is my dad's influence. Anyone remember Laurel and Hardy?
Oh, yes.
I tell you, like,
Saturday
we need a bit
mornings.
of laughter. We need a bit of laughter, but honestly, even the thought of Laurel and Hardy makes me laugh.
Yeah, but
and I think we should have
those were
a
the
bit
days
of
when you could make
simple
fun
joy.
of fat people, which you can't do.
Well, I think there was simple joy in that, and I know I wouldn't be in it.
No. Craig?
I think for me, so I'm a bit of a winter sports fan, and I've done the Curl Runnings bobsleigh run at Calgary, which went down, which is quite cool. So, and I'm also I qualified as a ski instructor when I was younger. But so I think that I'd like to go on the jump, if you remember the jump, as a bit of a ringer in the background, because they'd probably be expecting us to tee up.
Have you ever actually done that?
So,
ski jump.
Well, to be honest, I went to the top of because Eddie Edwards up near where he was an instructor in the Snowdome, and the ski jump he went down to, I've been to the top of it and looked down, and I would actually rather do that than do another bobsleigh run. So
well, 4 brilliant answers there. The best fun question answers we've had for many weeks on the show, so well done for that. And thanks to Paul Nowak, Seema Malhotra, Sam Lister and Craig Tracey. On tomorrow's panel we have the Tory MP John Penrose, Belle Ribeiro Addy from Labour, the chair of the press regulator IPSO, Lord Edward Fawkes, and the human rights and immigration lawyer Jacqueline Mackenzie. But coming up in the next hour, millions of pounds of funding into social care last year is said to have made no difference to the financial sustainability of the majority of providers surveyed for a report into a sector described as being sustained state of crisis. 518 care homes closed last year net. Why is this happening? What challenges does it provide you if you have to move a loved one from one care home to another? There are lots of examples of people who've had to do that 3 or 4 times, and they blame the